Nia Williams collapsed onto the threadbare couch in her South Side apartment, every muscle in her body screaming from another double shift at the hospice. At 26, she felt twice her age. The worn cushions had long since lost their support, much like her finances, but she couldn't think about that now. Between caring for Grandma Eleanor in the back bedroom and making sure Terrence had everything he needed for his sophomore year at Northwestern, there was barely enough left of Nia to go around. She pulled out her phone, thumb hovering over Marcus's contact. All week, she'd been building toward this moment, rehearsing the words, imagining his response, terrifying herself with possibilities. Marcus Jenkins, who still lived 3 blocks over in the house where he grew up, who remembered her from high school calculus and always stopped to chat when their paths crossed. Tonight had to be the night. If she didn't do it now, she never would. Her fingers trembled as she typed, "I love you. I've loved you for so long, and I can't keep it inside anymore." She hit send before she could overthink it. Exhaustion pulled at her eyelids. She let them close just for a moment. When her phone buzzed, her heart lurched, but the response made her blood run cold. "I think you have the wrong number." Nia's eyes flew open. She checked the number. Her stomach dropped. 1 digit off. 1 digit. The mortification hit like a physical wave. She typed frantically, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. This is the most embarrassing moment of my entire life, and I've accidentally told a complete stranger my deepest feelings. Please forget this happened. I'm going to throw my phone in Lake Michigan now." Across the city in a sleek high-rise office, Min-Jun Park stared at the second message. The corner of his mouth twitched, something that happened so rarely that Jin, his second in command, actually stopped mid-sentence when he walked in. "Boss, are you smiling?" Min-Jun's expression smoothed back to its usual careful neutrality. At 32, he'd perfected the art of showing nothing. It was necessary in his line of work. His import-export business was successful, legitimate on paper, but the real operation, the network of carefully orchestrated deals, the territory, the money, required absolute control. Emotion was a liability. And yet, he looked at the message again. Something about the vulnerability, the humor, even in embarrassment, the realness of it. It had slipped past his defenses like nothing had in years. He did what came naturally. "Trace this number. I want to know everything. Before we dive in, if you're watching right now, kindly tell us where you're watching from." Now, let's get back to the story. By morning, a file sat on his desk. Nia Williams, hospice nurse, guardian to her grandmother and younger brother. Financial struggles, but no debt from illegal sources. Spotless record. Volunteered at the community center teaching kids to read. The surveillance. Footage showed a woman with natural hair pulled back from her face. Exhaustion in the set of her shoulders, but warmth in her brown eyes when she smiled at patients. Min-Jun studied that smile. It transformed her entire face, made her beautiful in a way his world had forgotten existed. Min-Jun stared at the file until 3 a.m., then made a decision that would have his entire organization questioning his judgment. By 6 a.m. Saturday morning, he was standing outside an upscale bakery in Lincoln Park, watching through the window as they boxed up almond croissants, chocolate-filled pastries, and fresh fruit danishes. The barista prepared 2 large coffees, one black, one with cream, and 2 sugars, because his people had been thorough in their report. Jin's voice echoed in his head from their argument an hour earlier. "This is insane. You don't do this. You never do this. One text message from a wrong number and you're compromising operational security?" For what? Min-Jun hadn't had an answer then. He still didn't as he stood outside Nia's building in his charcoal Tom Ford suit, the one he'd chosen because it was expensive but understated, powerful but not ostentatious. He was trying to look casual, which was laughable. Min-Jun Park had never been casual a day in his life. He pressed the buzzer for apartment 3B. The intercom crackled. "Hello?" Her voice was thick with sleep. "It's the wrong number. From Thursday night." Silence stretched so long he thought she'd hung up. "I brought coffee." More silence, then, "You're joking." "I don't joke. That's what someone who's about to murder me would say." Despite himself, Min-Jun smiled. "I'm not going to murder you. I'm standing outside your building with pastries." Another long pause. Then the buzzer sounded. When Nia opened the door, they both froze. The surveillance footage hadn't done her justice. Her skin was richer, warm brown that seemed to glow even in the dim hallway light. Her hair was wrapped in a silk scarf, and she wore flannel pajama pants with little clouds on them and an oversized northwestern hoodie that had to be her brother's. No makeup, eyes still slightly puffy from sleep, and Min-jun felt something in his chest shift dangerously. Nia's mouth opened and closed twice before words emerged. "You're real." "Yes." "You brought coffee." "And pastries." He held up the bag from Floriole, acutely aware of how insane this was. A man who ordered executions with a nod was standing in a South Side hallway at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning, holding baked goods like some kind of romantic comedy protagonist. "This is the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me," Nia said slowly. "And I once had a patient's ghost supposedly throw a bedpan at me, so that's saying something." "I was in the neighborhood," Min-jun started, then stopped. The lie tasted wrong. "No, that's not true. I wanted to meet you." Her eyes widened. For a moment, he thought she'd slam the door in his face, which would be the smart choice, the safe choice. Instead, she stepped back. "You're either incredibly sweet or incredibly creepy, and I haven't decided which yet. But those smell amazing, and I haven't had good coffee in 3 months, so come in before I change my mind." The apartment was small, warm, lived in. Photos covered every surface. Nia graduating from nursing school, a young boy at various ages, an elegant older woman who had to be the grandmother. The furniture was old but cared for, everything clean despite obvious wear. It was the opposite of Min-jun's sterile penthouse, and something about it made his throat tight. "Nia, baby, who's at the door?" The voice came from the back bedroom, reedy but sharp. "Someone very confused about how boundaries work, Grandma." An elderly woman shuffled out in a purple robe, her hair in silver curls, her dark eyes shrewd despite the oxygen tube in her nose. She took one look at Min-jun and smiled. "Well, aren't you pretty?" "Grandma," Nia's face flamed, "I'm Eleanor Williams." The old woman extended a thin hand. "And you are?" "Min-jun Park." He shook her hand gently, aware of its fragility. "Korean?" "Yes, ma'am." "Brought my granddaughter fancy coffee at 7 a.m. on a Saturday." Eleanor's smile widened. "I like you already. Nia never has any fun." "That's not... We don't even... Grandma, please go back to bed." "I'm old and dying, baby. I get to embarrass you." But Eleanor patted Nia's cheek gently and shuffled back toward her room, calling over her shoulder. "Keep this one. He's got kind eyes." Nia covered her face with both hands. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be." Min-jun meant it. Something about Eleanor's directness, her warmth, her complete lack of fear. It reminded him of his own grandmother back in Seoul, before everything changed. A door slammed deeper in the apartment. "Nia, why are you talking so loud?" A young man emerged, 19 or 20, in basketball shorts and a t-shirt. He stopped dead. "Who the hell is this?" "Terrence, language, this is Min-jun, he's..." "The wrong number," Min-jun supplied. Terrence's eyes narrowed. "The wrong number bought Floriole? That's like $30 of pastries." "Your sister's message was memorable." "Oh God," Nia muttered. "Can we not?" But Min-jun found himself genuinely curious about the suspicious young man. "Let me guess, you're at Northwestern. Computer science?" Terrence's stance shifted slightly, still protective but interested. "Double major, CS and applied mathematics." They ended up at the small kitchen table, the three of them, pastries on mismatched plates and coffee in chipped mugs. Min-jun asked Terrence about his thesis proposal on machine learning applications. Terrence, after initial skepticism, launched into an explanation that revealed real brilliance. Min-jun offered insights, carefully edited versions of how he'd used similar algorithms in business logistics, and watched the kid's face light up. Nia said little, watching them both with an expression Min-jun couldn't quite read. When Terrence finally excused himself to work on a problem set, she leaned forward. "How do you know so much about machine learning algorithms?" "I read." "Nobody just reads that deeply into ML theory." Min-jun met her eyes. She was smart, this woman who'd accidentally texted him her heart, too smart to lie to, though he'd have to. "I use it in my work." "Which is?" "Import-export, logistics, data analysis for supply chain optimization." "All technically true." "It's boring." "You don't seem like a boring person." You have no idea, he thought. Instead, he said, "Tell me about your patients." And she did. For the next 3 hours, they talked. She told him about Mrs. Chen, who sang opera until her last breath, about Marcus, the actual Marcus, who turned out to be engaged anyway, about her dream to open a community health clinic someday. Minjun told her carefully curated truths about growing up in Seoul, about his parents who'd wanted him to be a doctor, about the loneliness of success. He didn't tell her about the territory war brewing on the west side, about the shipment arriving Tuesday that he'd need to personally oversee, about the fact that he'd killed 3 men before his 25th birthday. When he finally stood to leave, the afternoon sun was slanting through the windows. "I should go." "Yeah." Nia walked him to the door. This was weird. Very. But also kind of nice? Yes. He looked at her, this woman with tired eyes and a generous heart, and knew with absolute certainty that he should never see her again. "Can I take you to dinner? Tomorrow?" She bit her lip, smiled. "You're definitely creepy, but also maybe incredibly sweet. So, yes." As Minjun walked to his car, Jin's warnings rang in his ears. But all he could think about was Nia's laugh, her grandmother's knowing smile, her brother's enthusiasm about algorithms. He was already in too deep. And he didn't care. The Ethiopian restaurant on Clark Street became their place by the second visit. Minjun watched Nia tear off pieces of injera with practiced ease, scooping up dorowat while explaining the difference between berber and mitmita spices. Her eyes lit up when she talked, hands gesturing, and he found himself memorizing every detail, the way her natural hair caught the candlelight, the small scar on her left eyebrow from a childhood fall, how her laugh started soft and then bloomed into something uninhibited. "You're staring," she said, not looking up from her food. "I'm listening." "You can listen without looking like you're solving a complex equation." Minjun felt his lips curve. "Maybe you're a complex equation." Smooth, but she was smiling. "Your turn. Tell me something real." His phone buzzed for the 7th time that hour. Jin, probably, with updates on the West Side situation, or Lee about the shipment schedule, or any number of emergencies that would normally have him halfway out the door. He silenced it without looking. "I've lived in Chicago for 8 years, he said slowly. "I've never been to Millennium Park." Nia set down her injera. "You're joking." "I don't joke. Yeah, I'm learning that." She shook her head, incredulous. "We're going. Tomorrow." Nope, tomorrow. This is a cultural emergency." So they went to Millennium Park on a Tuesday afternoon. Minjun in dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Naya's car payment, looking thoroughly out of place among the tourists. She dragged him to Cloudgate, laughing at his polite confusion over why everyone was photographing a giant bean. "It's reflective. It's art." She pulled out her phone. "It's a bean. You're impossible." But she was grinning, taking a selfie of them both, their reflections warped and multiplied in the sculpture's surface. Minjun looked uncomfortable in the photo, standing stiffly, but his eyes were on her, not the camera. Soft, unguarded. He made that expression disappear so quickly, she almost thought she'd imagined it. Later that week, Terrence's ancient Honda Civic died in the driveway with a grinding sound that made Nia want to cry. They couldn't afford a mechanic. She was mentally calculating how many extra shifts she'd need when Minjun appeared. He'd been doing that lately, just showing up like he had some sixth sense for when she needed help. "Pop the hood," he said simply. "You know about cars?" Something flickered in his expression. "I know about a lot of things." He shed his suit jacket, charcoal gray, definitely Tom Ford, definitely worth more than the car, and draped it over their rusty chain-link fence. Then he lay down on the oil-stained concrete driveway in his dress shirt and slacks like it was the most natural thing in the world. Terrence handed him tools, both of them speaking a language of carburetors and timing belts that Nia didn't understand. She sat on the porch steps watching this man, this impossibly put-together man who moved through the world like he owned it, get motor oil on his expensive clothes, and genuinely smile at her brother's terrible jokes. People walked by on the sidewalk, and she noticed how they gave Minjun a wide berth, even lying on his back under a car. Like something in his bearing commanded space without asking. "Your boyfriend's weird," Terrence said later, after Minjun had left and the car was running. "But in a good way, I think." "He's not my boyfriend." "Nia." He fixed our car in a $3,000 suit. She didn't have an answer for that. The groceries appeared on Thursday. Not cheap staples, but good things. Fresh vegetables, quality proteins, the expensive oat milk she loved but never bought. No note, no explanation, just bags on their doorstep. When she called Minjun, he answered on the first ring. Yes? Did you send us groceries? A pause. I don't know what you mean. Minjun, maybe you have a secret admirer. I have you, who shows up and fixes things and makes phone calls about Terrence's scholarship. Yes, he told me about that too. And I don't... She stopped, struggling for words. I don't know how to feel about this. Another pause, longer. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, almost uncertain. I just want to help. Is that wrong? The vulnerability in his tone disarmed her. This man who carried himself with such authority, suddenly sounding almost shy. No, it's not wrong. It's just a lot. I can stop. I didn't say that. She heard him exhale. Nia, I don't know how to do this, any of this. I just know that when I think about you struggling with things I could easily fix, it physically hurts. Her chest tightened. Okay, thank you. For the groceries and the scholarship calls and everything, but Minjun, talk to me first, all right? Let me be part of these decisions. All right. But they both knew he'd keep trying to fix things. It was who he was. The rain started during dinner Saturday night, a late autumn downpour that turned the streets to rivers. Minjun insisted on walking her home despite the weather, both of them huddled under his umbrella. By the time they reached her building, they were soaked anyway, laughing at the absurdity of it. She looked up at him, rain streaming down both their faces, and made a decision. I know you're holding back. His expression shuddered. Nia, you are. I can feel it. The way you check your phone and don't answer. How you never talk about your family or your work beyond vague descriptions. The expense of everything. The way people look at you. She stepped closer. And I don't care. I don't need to know everything right now. But I need you to stop treating this, us, like it's temporary, like you're going to disappear. You don't understand what you're asking. Then help me understand, but don't shut me out. I don't want you to hold back anymore. Something in Minjun's careful control cracked. He lowered the umbrella, letting it clatter to the ground, and cupped her face with both hands. His palms were warm against her rain-chilled skin, his touch achingly gentle. If I stop holding back, he said softly, I won't be able to let you go. Good. He kissed her like a man drowning, like she was air and he'd been underwater too long, desperate and tender and fierce all at once. His hand slid to the back of her neck, fingers threading through her wet hair while the other stayed on her face, thumb stroking her cheekbone like she was something precious, something he was terrified of breaking. Nia felt herself falling, had been falling since he showed up with coffee 2 weeks ago, maybe since the moment he responded to her wrong number text with unexpected kindness. She gripped his soaked shirt, kissed him back with everything she had, rain pouring down around them like the world was washing away everything but this moment. When they, finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Minjun pressed his forehead to hers. You're going to ruin me, he whispered. Good, she said again. She was already ruined too. Impossibly, irrevocably, in love with a man she barely knew, who remembered her coffee order and fixed her car and kissed her like she was his salvation, who looked at her like she was the only real thing in his world. Whatever secrets he was keeping, whatever darkness lived behind those careful eyes, Nia was already too far gone to care. Terrence couldn't sleep. It was 2 a.m. on a Thursday, and something had been nagging at him for days, the way Minjun's business associates looked more like enforcers, how that scholarship money had appeared too quickly, too conveniently. The expensive suits and the careful words and the way grown men stepped aside when Minjun walked past. He opened his laptop. The first search, Minjun Park, Chicago, brought up nothing unusual. Business registrations, a few professional photos. But Terrence was a computer science major who'd grown up on the South Side. He knew how to dig deeper. He added terms. Investigation. Allegations. Korean organized crime. The results loaded, and his stomach dropped. Chicago Tribune 2019. Alleged crime boss walks free after witness recants. Sun Times 2021. Federal investigation into Korean syndicate yields no charges. FBI reports leaked. Park Min-jun, suspected head of Midwest operations. Photo after photo. Min-jun leaving courtrooms in expensive suits, his face a mask of indifference. Min-jun at the scene of a warehouse fire that killed 2 men, consulting as a business owner. Min-jun's name connected to money laundering, extortion, trafficking. Always alleged, always suspected, never proven. But the pattern was unmistakable. Terrence printed everything, article after article, his hands shaking. This was the man his sister was falling in love with, the man who'd fixed their car and talked algorithms with genuine interest and looked at Nia like she was something sacred. This was also a man who probably, had people killed. By the time the sun rose, Terrence had filled a folder. He waited until he heard Nia moving in her room, getting ready for her shift. His grandmother was still sleeping. This conversation needed to happen before Min-jun showed up again with coffee and that slight smile that had won them all over. Nia. His voice came out harder than intended. Kitchen, now. She emerged in her scrubs, hair pulled back, confused. What's wrong? Is it Grandma? Sit down. Something in his tone made her obey. Terrence spread the printouts across their scarred kitchen table like evidence in a trial. Because that's what this was. Have you Googled him? Even once? Nia stared at the papers. Her face went pale as she started reading. These are allegations. Nothing was proven. Read all of it. Every article, every police report. He watched her. Read. Watched the color drain from her face, then flood back in angry red patches. Watched her hands start to shake as she picked up article after article. FBI investigations, suspected syndicate operations, money laundering, words like dangerous and ruthless and criminal enterprise. The warehouse fire, Terrence said quietly. 2 men died. Min-jun was questioned for 8 hours and released. The witnesses all suddenly had memory problems. This doesn't mean... Nia, look at the pattern. Look at all of it. He pointed to a photo of Min-jun leaving a federal courthouse, flanked by lawyers who cost more than most people's houses. This is who you're dating. This is who's been in our home, around Grandma, around us. She was crying now, silent tears tracking down her face. The man I know wouldn't. How well do you know him, really? Terrence softened slightly. I like him too. That's what's so messed up. He seems genuine. But Nia, what if that's just what he does? What if being charming is part of being a crime boss? Don't. Her voice cracked. Don't do that. But she was looking at the papers again, at the evidence of a life Min-jun had never shared, at the truth hiding behind expensive suits and gentle kisses and poetry recited in Korean. That evening, Nia's hands shook as she typed the text. We need to talk. Tonight. The response came immediately. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She waited in the hallway outside her apartment, unable to let him inside, unable to have this conversation where her grandmother might hear, where the walls held memories of his laughter, his presence, the life she'd been foolish enough to imagine they could build. Min-jun appeared exactly 20 minutes later, emerging from the stairwell. He took one look at her face and stopped walking. Something in his expression shifted, a door closing, a mask sliding into place, but underneath she saw understanding. Resignation. He knew. You found out, not a question. Are you involved in organized crime? Her voice was steadier than she felt. Min-jun was silent for a long moment. She watched him calculate, saw the moment he decided something. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. Yes. The word hit like a physical blow, even though she'd known. Hearing him say it made it real. Are you the boss? Yes. Have you? She couldn't finish. Couldn't ask about the blood on his hands, the violence, the things he'd done to build whatever empire the articles described. Yes? He answered anyway. Though I've worked to minimize casualties, to protect people where I can, to be... He laughed bitter. Better than my predecessors, if that matters. It doesn't make it okay. I know. Nia wiped her face angrily. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have let me stay if I had, that first morning? He met her eyes. I should have told you. After the first date, the second, any of them. I was selfish. I wanted his voice roughened with emotion he was clearly fighting to contain. I wanted to pretend I could be someone else, someone worthy of you. Being with you puts me in danger. Real danger. Yes. Just yes. No minimizing, no excuses. The honesty was somehow worse than lies would have been. My family too. Terrence, my grandmother. Yes. Minjun's jaw tightened, which is why I'll walk away, right now. It's the only honorable thing to do. My feelings for you don't matter compared to your safety. Each word seemed to cost him something. I'm sorry, Nia, for all of it, for not being who you thought I was, for putting you at risk, for being too weak to stay away in the first place. She wanted to rage at him, wanted to demand how he could do this, pursue her, make her fall in love with him while hiding something so fundamental. Wanted to ask why he couldn't be the man she'd believed him to be, the one who fixed cars and made her grandmother laugh and kissed her like she was precious. Instead, all that came out was, leave, please. I need time to think. Minjun nodded once, a sharp movement that looked almost military. If anyone approaches you, anyone you don't know, asking questions about me, call this number immediately. He handed her a card with a single phone number printed on it. Jin will make sure you're protected, even if you never want to see me again. I don't want your protection. You have it anyway, whether you want it or not, whether I'm in your life or not. That doesn't end. He turned to leave, and Nia noticed for the first time how heavy his footsteps sounded. Like every step carried the weight of his entire world, the violence, the secrets, the impossible choices. Like walking away from her was physically painful. She almost called him back. Instead, she watched him disappear down the stairwell, watched the space where he'd been standing. The hallway smelled faintly of his cologne, cedar, and something expensive she'd never be able to afford, evidence of his presence lingering after he was gone. The first day without Minjun, Nia threw herself into work. Double shift at the hospice, where Mrs. Chen asked about that handsome young man, and Nia had to excuse herself to cry in the supply closet. She came home to find groceries on the doorstep again, fresh flowers this time too, and nearly threw them down the hallway before Terrence caught her arm. Don't waste good food because you're mad, he said quietly. She kept the groceries, threw away the flowers, hated herself for both decisions. The second day, she researched. Hours of reading about organized crime, about the Korean syndicates in the Midwest, about Minjun specifically. Every article painted him as calculated, dangerous, untouchable. Sources close to the investigation described a man who'd consolidated power through intelligence and strategic violence, who eliminated threats efficiently, who ran his operation like a Fortune 500 company, legitimate, businesses fronting illegal ones, money laundered through dozens of shell corporations, connections reaching from Chicago to Seoul. This was supposed to make her feel better, make her choice easier. Instead, she found herself remembering how his hands shook slightly when he first kissed her, how he'd learned her grandmother's peach cobbler recipe and brought it over with such shy pride, how he'd listened to Terrence talk about algorithms with genuine interest, not the polite attention of someone humoring a kid. The man in the articles and the man she knew existed in the same body, and she didn't know what to do with that. The third day, her grandmother had a bad spell. Nia sat beside her bed, monitoring oxygen levels, adjusting medication, while Eleanor drifted in and out of consciousness. In a lucid moment, the old woman gripped Nia's hand. You're thinking about him. Grandma, rest. I'm dying, baby. Don't waste my good hours. Eleanor's eyes were sharp despite her weakened body. You think I don't know what's going on? That boy hasn't come around. You've been crying. Terrence has been angry. What happened? Nia told her. All of it. The articles, the allegations, the truth Minjun had admitted. Eleanor listened without interrupting, her thin fingers still wrapped around Nia's hand. When Nia finished, Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then, come closer. Let me tell you something about your grandfather. Grandma, I know Grandpa wasn't perfect, but hush. Your grandfather ran numbers for the Southside bosses in the 60s. Did you know that? Eleanor's voice was matter of fact. He took bets, collected debts, did what he had to do to survive when black men couldn't get real jobs in the city. He wasn't violent, but he wasn't innocent either. And I loved him anyway. 43 years I loved that man. Nia stared. I didn't know. Because we don't talk about it. Because life isn't as simple as good and bad, legal and illegal. Your grandfather made choices, hard ones, to survive and protect us. He got out eventually, went legitimate. But those years happened. Eleanor squeezed her hand. Love isn't about finding someone perfect, baby. It's about whether someone makes you want to be brave enough to see them fully and choose them anyway. But Minjun is dangerous. He could what? Hurt you. Eleanor's laugh turned into a cough. When she recovered, her eyes were fierce. Baby, I've watched that man with you. He looks at you like you're the sun after a lifetime of darkness. That man would burn his whole world down before he let harm come to you. The question isn't whether he's dangerous. The question is whether you're brave enough to love someone complicated. The fourth day, Terrence surprised her. They were eating leftover Chinese food, more mystery deliveries, when he said, I've been looking into what Minjun's organization actually does. Terrence, just listen. Yeah, there's illegal stuff. Money laundering, probably extortion, things I don't want to think about. But Nini, have you noticed what's been happening in the neighborhood? He pulled out his laptop, showing her data. Gang violence is down 30% in the past year. The community center got a huge anonymous donation. 5 kids from our block got random scholarships. That bodega that kept getting robbed hasn't had a single incident in 8 months. So he's a benevolent crime lord? That's your argument? No, I'm saying he's complicated. I'm saying maybe he's trying to be better, maybe because of you. Terrence met her eyes. Look, I don't like this at all, but I've been watching and he's good to you, Nini, really good. And I think you're good for him too. You make him want to be someone better than he is. That's not my job. To fix him? No, but maybe it's not about fixing. Maybe it's about choosing. Terrence shrugged, uncomfortable with the philosophical turn. I'm just saying, if you love him, and you do, I can see it. Maybe that's enough. Maybe love is choosing people even when they're complicated. The 5th day, Nia sat on her worn couch, the same one where this had all started with a wrong number and an accidental confession, and stared at her phone. She thought about the articles and the allegations, about her grandmother's stories and Terrence's reluctant acceptance, about Minjun's face when he'd admitted the truth, the way his voice had broken when he'd said he'd walk away. She thought about how he'd held her in the rain, desperate and tender, how he'd quoted poetry in Korean and then translated it shyly, like offering her a piece of himself, how he'd worked on their car in his expensive suit, genuinely happy to help, how he'd learned to make peach cobbler, bringing it over with such pride when he got it right. She thought about what her grandmother had said. Life isn't as simple as good and bad. At 8 p.m. on the 5th night, Nia picked up her phone. Her hands were steady when she typed, "Come over, we need to talk." The response came in seconds. 20 minutes. He must have driven like a demon, because it was 18 minutes when her buzzer rang. Nia let him up, opened her door, and waited. Minjun looked like hell. His suit was rumpled, dark circles under his eyes, hair slightly disheveled. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, had spent 5 days in purgatory. When he saw her, something in his expression cracked open, hope and fear and desperate longing all at once. "Come in," she said. They sat on her couch, the space between them feeling like miles. Nia looked at this man, this complicated, dangerous, tender man, and made her choice. "I'm not naive," she began, her voice steady. "I know what you are and what you do. I've read the articles, Minjun. I've seen the allegations. I know being with you means accepting things that scare me, things that maybe should make me run." His face was carefully blank, but she saw his hands clench. "But I also know what I feel when I'm with you. I know that you're trying to be better. I know my grandmother sees something good in you. I know Terrence thinks you're worth the risk. And I know that love, real love, isn't about perfection." She took his hand, feeling him tremble. "It's about seeing someone fully and choosing them anyway. So I'm choosing you, Minjun Park. If you'll have me, if you'll let me see all of you, even the dark parts, if you'll be honest with me, even when it's hard." For a moment, Minjun didn't move. Then, this man, who commanded respect through fear, who'd built an empire through calculated violence, who hadn't cried since childhood, felt tears slip down his face. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe, and whispered in Korean first, then English, I'll spend the rest of my life being worthy of that choice. I swear it. 나는 당신을 사랑합니다. I love you. I'll be better. For you, I'll be better. Nia held him while he shook, this powerful man crumbling in her arms, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that this wouldn't be easy, that there would be hard days and impossible choices and moments when she'd question everything. But she also knew she'd choose him again. Every time. Despite everything. I love you too, she whispered, even though you're complicated. Especially because I'm complicated, he corrected, his voice rough with emotion, and she felt him smile against her hair. The morning after their reunion, Min-jun showed up at 6 a.m. with coffee and something new. Honesty. He sat at her kitchen table and told her about a shipment coming in from the West Coast, about a territory dispute he was mediating, about the legitimate real estate deal that was actually a front for moving money. He spoke matter-of-factly, watching her face for signs she'd bolt. She didn't. She listened, asked questions, and when he was done, said simply, "Thank you for telling me." It became their pattern. He didn't hide his work anymore, though he shielded her from the worst details, the violence, the specific threats, the decisions that kept him awake at night. But the broad strokes, the structure of his organization, the impossible choices he faced daily, those he shared. Nia learned that his organization had 5 major divisions, that Jin wasn't just his second, but his childhood friend who'd followed him from Seoul, that the import-export business was actually profitable and legitimate, funding operations that weren't. She learned he'd inherited this life from his uncle at 23 and had spent nearly a decade trying to make it less brutal than what came before. "I'm not looking for redemption," he told her one night, both of them on her fire escape, the city sprawling below them. "I know what I am, but I can be better than I was. For you. For us. That has to count for something." "It does," she said, and meant it. Their Kritni. Months in, Min-jun called a meeting with his inner circle, Jin, Lee, Park, and 2 others, men who'd been with him for years. They sat in his office, a converted warehouse space in a nondescript building, and stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "We're reducing violent operations by 40% over the next year," Min-jun announced. "Focus shifts to legitimate business expansion and strategic partnerships. We use influence, not intimidation." "Boss, with all respect, that's suicide." Lee leaned forward. "The Russians will see it as weakness. The Mexicans will push into our territory. The Russians and Mexicans will see we're strategic, not desperate. Violence draws law enforcement. Violence creates vendettas. Violence is expensive." Min-jun's voice was calm. "We're evolving or we're dying slowly. I choose evolution." Jin studied him with knowing eyes. "This is about her. This is about survival. She just helped me see it clearly." Min-jun met each man's gaze. "We've been operating on fear for too long. Fear works until it doesn't. Then everyone loses. I'm building something sustainable." They were skeptical, but over the following months, they saw results. Law enforcement attention decreased. Revenue actually increased as they focused on profitable, legitimate ventures. Retaliatory conflicts dropped because they weren't starting them. Other organizations noticed the shift and adjusted their own approaches. Jin cornered Min-jun one evening. "I was wrong about her. She makes you smarter, not weaker." "I know," Min-jun said simply. Meanwhile, Nia's community was watching. Mrs. Patterson from 3B, who'd known Nia since she was in diapers, pulled her aside at the corner store. "This man you're seeing, the Korean one," Nia braced herself. "Yes, ma'am?" "I don't know what he does, and I don't want to know." Mrs. Patterson's eyes were sharp. "But I know my grandson got into that tech program because of a scholarship that didn't exist last year. I know Mr. Chen's store hasn't been robbed since spring. I know we can walk to the corner at night again." She patted Nia's hand. "You brought us something good, baby, even if it came in a complicated package." It became a pattern. The community center got renovated, anonymous donation. 3 more kids from their block got scholarships. The gang activity that had plagued their streets for years simply stopped. No obvious police presence, no dramatic arrests, just a quiet shift that everyone noticed and no one questioned too closely. Min-jun attended every family gathering, often overdressed in his expensive suits, always slightly awkward. He learned to cook Grandma Eleanor's peach cobbler, her fried chicken, her collared greens. He'd show up with flour on his Tom Ford shirt, looking simultaneously ridiculous and endearing. "You don't have to do this," Naya told him, watching him carefully season chicken. "I want to learn your world, the things that matter to you." He glanced at her grandmother, who was supervising from her chair. "Besides, your grandmother says I need to know how to cook real food, not just that restaurant nonsense." Eleanor cackled. "Damn right, can't trust a man who can't feed his woman." "Grandma!" But Min-jun was smiling, that rare, full smile that transformed his face. 4 months in, Min-jun asked Nia to attend a negotiation dinner, a dispute between his organization and a Vietnamese group over territory boundaries. She tried to refuse. "I don't belong in that world." "You belong where I am," he said simply, "and I think you can help. You understand people in ways my men don't. You see things we miss." The dinner was tense. 8 men around a table, speaking in careful euphemisms about business interests and operational boundaries. Naya felt utterly out of place in her simple dress among these men in expensive suits, discussing territory like corporate executives discussing market share. Then she noticed the Vietnamese leader's second, younger, angry, radiating hostility. She leaned toward Min-jun and whispered, "The young one feels disrespected. His boss keeps dismissing him. That's why he's pushing for conflict." Min-jun's eyes flickered. He addressed the young man directly in Vietnamese. Nia hadn't known he spoke it, and included him in the conversation, asked his opinion, treated him with respect. The tension shifted. The young man relaxed. The negotiation suddenly became possible. They reached an agreement that night. No bloodshed, no turf war, just practical boundaries both sides could accept. Jin pulled Nia aside as they left. "That was unexpected. You're good at this." "I'm good at seeing people," she corrected. "It's what nurses do." "Still, thank you." He paused. "He's different with you. Better. We've all noticed." After that, she became an occasional presence at negotiations, never for anything violent, but for moments requiring diplomacy, emotional intelligence, seeing past posturing to real concerns. Min-jun was careful about how much he exposed her to, but her insights proved valuable. Their relationship deepened in quieter ways, too. Min-jun learned to be vulnerable, to share his fears about following his uncle's path, about whether he could ever truly be good enough for her. Nia learned to be strong in ways she'd never imagined, to hold space for moral complexity without judgment. They laughed more than either expected. Min-jun had a dry, sharp sense of humor that emerged when he felt safe. He'd make devastating observations about his business rivals or tell deadpan stories about organizational mishaps that had Naya crying with laughter. They built rituals. Saturday morning coffee on her fire escape, watching the city wake up. Wednesday dinners with her grandmother, where Min-jun would present his latest cooking attempt. Late-night drives when Min-jun couldn't sleep and needed to feel normal. Nia in the passenger seat of his expensive car, talking about everything and nothing. 7 months in, Eleanor's health declined sharply. Nia took leave from work to care for her full-time. Min-jun was there for every hospital visit, every difficult conversation with doctors, every moment Nia needed to cry. He sat with Eleanor when Nia needed to sleep, reading to her from books she loved, holding her frail hand. "You're a good man," Eleanor told him one afternoon, her voice weak. "Complicated, but good. You take care of my girl." "With my life," Min-jun promised. "I know. I see it in how you look at her." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Don't let the darkness win, Min-jun. You've got light now. Hold on to it." On an autumn morning when the leaves were turning gold, Eleanor passed peacefully. Nia held one hand, Min-jun the other. Terence stood at the foot of the bed crying silently. In that moment, Nia realized Min-jun wasn't just her boyfriend or her partner. He was family. The person she turned to in her darkest moment, who held her steady when grief threatened to drown her. At the funeral, Min-jun stood beside her in a simple black suit, his hand a constant presence on her back. Her community surrounded them. Mrs. Patterson, the neighbors, her co-workers, people whose lives Eleanor had touched. And they accepted him, this complicated man who'd loved their Eleanor, who loved her granddaughter with obvious devotion. "She was right about you," Naya whispered during the service. You're good. Complicated, but good. Minjun pulled her closer, pressed a kiss to her temple, said nothing because some truths didn't need words. They'd built something together, a bridge between worlds that shouldn't connect but somehow did. It wasn't perfect. It would never be simple, but it was theirs, and it was real, and it was enough. 3 months after Eleanor's death, Minjun became impossible to work with. Jin watched his boss obsess over engagement rings with a mixture of amusement and concern. The emerald cut or the cushion cut? Minjun asked for the 3rd time that week, spreading jeweler catalogs across his desk. Boss, they're both expensive rocks. She'll love either one. This isn't about expensive. Minjun's jaw tightened. This is about getting it right. He'd planned everything meticulously, the way he approached all operations. Rooftop restaurant overlooking the city, string quartet, 24 roses, a photographer hidden to capture the moment. He'd reserved the entire venue, coordinated with Jin on security, even arranged for Terrence to be coincidentally nearby to celebrate after. It was elaborate, grand, expensive. It felt completely wrong. The evening before the planned proposal, Minjun drove to the cemetery alone. He'd been coming weekly since Eleanor passed, bringing fresh flowers, peonies, her favorites, and talking to her like she could hear him. Maybe she could. He wanted to believe that. He knelt beside her headstone, placing the flowers carefully. I'm proposing tomorrow. Have this whole plan, but I'm not sure it's right. He laughed softly. I've negotiated $1 million deals without breaking a sweat, and I can't figure out how to ask your granddaughter to marry me. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying autumn leaves across the grass. Minjun closed his eyes, remembering one of his last conversations with Eleanor. She'd gripped his hand with surprising strength, her voice weak but clear. That girl doesn't need your money or your grand gestures, baby. She needs your heart, honest and bare. Give her that, and you give her everything. Minjun opened his eyes, staring at Eleanor's name carved in stone. Tell me how to do right by her, he whispered. The wind gusted again, and somehow, he knew. He pulled out his phone and canceled everything. The restaurant, the quartet, the photographer. Jin called immediately. Boss, what's going on? Change of plans. I'm doing this differently. How differently? Honestly. The next evening, Minjun showed up at the apartment with takeout from Addis Ababa, their favorite Ethiopian restaurant. When Nia opened the door, she looked surprised. I thought you had that business dinner. Canceled. Wanted to spend the evening with you. He held up the bags. And Terrence, if he's here? How did you know? I pay attention. He smiled slightly. Is that okay? Terrence emerged from the back room, suspicious as always, but warming quickly when he saw the food. They sat around the table, the same one where Terrence had spread those damning articles months ago, and ate like a family. Terrence told stories about campus life, about his roommate who couldn't code to save his life, about the professor who'd taken him under her wing. Minjun listened with genuine interest, asked questions, laughed at the right moments. It was so normal, so perfect, that Minjun almost lost his nerve. When Terrence stood to leave, claiming he had to get back for a study group, Minjun stopped him. Actually, could you stay? I need you here for this. Terrence froze mid-step. His eyes went wide. Oh, if that's okay. Yeah, of course. Terrence sat back down, suddenly looking nervous. Minjun didn't get on one knee. He'd never been good at traditional gestures, at performing emotions he felt too deeply to display properly. Instead, he sat beside Naya on that worn couch, the same one where she'd sent that accidental text, where they'd had their first real conversation, where she'd told him she was choosing him despite everything. He took her hand, felt it tremble slightly. Or maybe that was him. I had this whole elaborate plan, he began, his voice less steady than usual. Jin would have been shocked to hear him sound uncertain. Rooftop restaurant, musicians, roses, everything expensive and grand. But your grandmother told me once that you don't need grand gestures. You need honesty. Nia's eyes were already wet. So here's my truth. Minjun took a breath. I was half alive before I met you. Going through motions, building an empire that meant nothing, surrounded by people who feared or needed me but didn't see me. You saw me. You chose to see all of me, The worst parts, the darkness, the choices I can't take back, and you didn't run." His thumb traced circles on her palm, a nervous gesture he'd never had before her. "You've made me want to be better. Not perfect, I know that's impossible. But better than I was, better than I thought I could be. You've made me want to build something good, to use what I have to protect instead of exploit, to believe I'm more than my worst choices." Terrence was crying silently, not even bothering to hide it. "I can't promise you perfection. I can't promise you safety, though God knows I'll try. I can't promise you a simple life because we both know mine is complicated in ways that won't just disappear." Minjun's voice roughened. "But I can promise you my absolute honesty, my loyalty, my protection, every piece of my heart for as long as I live. I can promise that you'll always come first, before the organization, before everything, that I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of the choice you made to love me." He pulled the ring box from his pocket with shaking hands. The ring inside was beautiful, but not ostentatious, a sapphire the color of twilight, deep blue with hints of purple, surrounded by small diamonds that caught the light. "Sapphires represent wisdom and loyalty," he explained quietly. "I wanted something that means something, something like you, beautiful and rare and stronger than it looks." Nia was fully crying now, both hands covering her mouth. "Nia Williams." Minjun's voice was barely above a whisper. "Will you marry me?" For a moment she couldn't speak. She looked at Terrence, who was nodding and smiling through his own tears, looked at this man who'd changed everything, who'd become family, who looked at her like she was his salvation. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." She launched herself into his arms before he could even take the ring from the box. Minjun caught her, held her tight, his face buried in her neck, breathing her in like he needed her to survive. His shoulders shook, and she realized he was crying too. This man who never cried, who controlled every emotion, was falling apart in her arms. "I love you," he whispered against her skin, switching between English and Korean. "Saranghaeo, I love you so much it terrifies me." "Good," she said through her tears. "Be terrified with me." When they finally pulled apart enough for him to slide the ring on her finger, it fit perfectly. Of course it did. Minjun never did anything without thorough research. Terrence cleared his throat. "So I guess I'm getting a brother who can probably have me killed?" Minjun laughed, actually laughed, full and genuine, and so unlike his usual controlled demeanor that even he looked surprised. I prefer to think of it as you getting a brother who will make sure nothing bad ever happens to you." They shook hands formally, then Terrence pulled him into an awkward hug. "You hurt her, and I don't care how scary you are, I know, you'll make me regret it." Minjun hugged him back. "I won't give you reason to." Later, they stood on the rooftop of their new apartment, larger than Nia's old place but still in the neighborhood, because she'd refused to leave her community. The Chicago skyline glowed behind them, orange and gold in the sunset. Minjun's arms were around her from behind, his chin resting on top of her head, their hands intertwined so her ring caught the dying light. "Do you ever think about that text message?" Nia asked softly. "How everything changed because I typed one wrong number?" Minjun kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I think about it every day. Best wrong number I ever received. Do you think we would have found each other anyway, if I hadn't sent it?" He considered this seriously. He never gave her easy answers, never dismissed her questions. "No," he said honestly. "I think we would have passed each other like ships in the night, living parallel lives that never touched. You would have stayed in your world, I would have stayed in mine. That accident was fate giving us a chance we would have been too scared to take otherwise." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. The sunset painted them both in gold, made the moment feel suspended, eternal. "I love you," she said, the same words that had started everything, sent to a wrong number on an exhausted Thursday night. "I love you," he responded, his voice carrying the weight of everything they'd been through, everything they'd chosen. Accidentally, inevitably, completely. Two people from impossible worlds who found each other through a mistaken text message, who chose to see each other fully, the light and the darkness, and build something beautiful anyway. Their love story was both an accident and a decision, the best kind of romance. Not perfect, but real. Not simple, but worth every complication. Not safe, but home. And sometimes, that's everything.